All right, let's dive in. Today, we're looking at a theory that treats history less like a textbook and more like a crime scene. The central idea that the dream of the 1960s didn't just fade away, it was deliberately extinguished. This quote right here really sets the stage. The source material isn't arguing that a generation just, grew up and got boring. No, the argument is that a genuine cultural and spiritual revolution was targeted, infiltrated, and methodically dismantled. So what was this revolution, really? Well, the source sees the 1960s as this incredible, spontaneous explosion of life and color, rebelling against the gray, buttoned-down world of the 1950s. And this wasn't just about politics. It was a change in frequency, a kind of psychic jailbreak that the powers that be saw as a complete system failure. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have what the source calls the Archonic 50s, controlled, sterile, literally black and white. Basically, a low-energy, predictable reality. And on the other, the Gnostic rebellion of the 60s, this burst of psychedelic color, mind-expanding music, and wild personal expression that was a direct assault on the drone of the decade before. Now, according to this theory, the weapons used in this rebellion were, well, they weren't guns and bombs. The source points to three main things. You had psychedelic rock, which was engineered to literally break old thought patterns. You had psychedelic art, this vibrant, almost sacred visual language. And then you had the dream of Apollo, the ultimate symbol of humanity breaking free of its limits and reaching for the stars. Okay, but here's where the whole story takes a really dark turn. The source makes a staggering claim that the absolute epicenter of this rebellion, the Laurel Canyon music scene in California, wasn't real. It was a manufactured, managed, psychological operation. Just think about the location for a second. The entire Laurel Canyon scene, this ground zero for hippie idealism, was literally right next door to a place called Lookout Mountain Laboratory. And this wasn't just some random army base. It was a top-secret, massive complex dedicated to making propaganda and psychological warfare films. The source argues that this isn't just a coincidence. It's a clue. And this brings us to the real bombshell allegation. The idea here is that the leaders of this counterculture didn't just spring up out of nowhere. The source says they weren't rebels fighting the system at all. In fact, they were the sons and daughters of the very military intelligence complex they were supposedly railing against. And here's the evidence laid out. Look at this list. It's kind of stunning. Jim Morrison, the Lizard King, the ultimate symbol of anti-authority, his dad was the admiral in charge of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the very thing that kicked the Vietnam War into high gear. Frank Zappa's dad, a chemical warfare specialist. The list goes on and on. The source presents this as Exhibit A, genealogical proof that this was a controlled operation. So, if it was an operation, what was the mission? Well, the theory says it was a classic three-step psyop. First, you infiltrate the scene by putting your assets, these military intel kids, into positions of power. Step 2, you co-opt and invert the message. You take this genuine search for higher consciousness and twist it into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, guiding the whole movement towards a dead end. And the final, darkest step, once the job's done, you neutralize the key players. So that infiltration, that was phase 1. Phase 2 was the overt takedown. And the argument here is that the counterculture was dismantled using the exact methods of a very real and very illegal government program. And that program was called COINTELPRO. This isn't a theory. We have the declassified documents. The FBI ran a secret war against American citizens, specifically going after civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and, counterculture figures. And that word neutralize, the source argues it was often a clean, bureaucratic way of saying assassinate. The source lays out this assassination like a 3-act play. Act 1, the decapitation. You take out the most powerful voices, Jones, Hendricks, Joplin, Morrison, all in a very short span of time. We now call it the 27 Club. Act 2, the demonic inversion. You stage the Manson murders to forever link the hippie movement with satanic, mindless violence in the public imagination. And Act 3, the public execution. You get the Altamont concert, the televised death of peace and love, with the Hells Angels who were famously infiltrated by law enforcement as the security. So after the leaders were gone and the message was poisoned, the final phase began. And this was a total war on the entire aesthetic of the 1960s. The goal, as the source puts it, was to replace this high-frequency culture of beauty and meaning with a low-frequency world of ugliness and confusion. First up was the war on sound. The theory goes that the complex, mind-expanding music of the 60s was intentionally swapped out for the hypnotic, repetitive, and ultimately safe beat of disco and cookie-cutter corporate rock. You're trading music that makes you think for music that just makes you consume. Next came the war on sight. The vibrant, organic, human-centered art and design of the 60s was replaced by the top-down imposition of brutalist architecture. Think about it. All those government buildings, universities, they all started to look like these giant concrete fortresses, designed, the source says, to make you feel small and powerless. Then there was the war on motion. You have the muscle car, this icon of American freedom, power, and, yeah, beauty, and it gets systematically regulated out of existence. What replaces it? The slow, ugly, unreliable cars of the Malaise era. A symbol of personal freedom becomes a symbol of daily frustration. And finally, maybe the most devastating attack of all, the war on hope. The source claims the awe-inspiring dream of the Apollo program was deliberately canceled and replaced by the space shuttle, basically a glorified delivery truck stuck in low Earth orbit. That grand dream of humanity reaching for the cosmos was intentionally downsized into a boring, bureaucratic program. So, when you add it all up, what was the real victory in the supposed war? It wasn't just about killing a few rock stars or changing fashion. It was about controlling the story, controlling the memory of what actually happened. And this is maybe the most brilliant part of the whole alleged operation. You take what the source calls a state-sponsored purge, a series of assassinations, and you rebrand it. You turn it into a romantic, tragic myth, the 27 Club. Now, instead of a story of murder, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame. The narrative completely shifts the blame onto the victims. And that leaves us with this final, really chilling question. If this theory is even partially true, if this was a systematic, deliberate war on beauty, on coherence, on hope itself, what happens to a society when it loses that war? Especially when it doesn't even know a war was ever fought. And that, right there, is something to think about.